We are very much delighted to have all of our participants joining from across Africa and around the world. We sincerely thank you for your time to be part of today's conversation. Of course, we are well aware of artificial intelligence being a transforming factor to our everyday life, from education to healthcare to finance to agriculture, cybersecurity. And as this technology rapidly evolves, effective leadership has never been more important today. So today's session will explore how AI is reshaping the future of our work and how current and aspiring leaders can position themselves to lead confidently, ethically, and strategically. My name is Malama Wakanda Victor. I'm the Vice Chairwoman of Women in TICON Africa, and I have the honor of serving as your anchor for today's session. We are excited to learn from our accomplished technology leader whose work continues to inspire innovation across Africa. But to officially open today's masterclass, it is my honor to invite the Women in TICON Africa Executive Secretary, Ms. Gifty Morty, to deliver our welcome remarks. Madam Secretary, the floor is all yours. Since Gifty is having a problem with her device, we will continue with our session. And I know that she would have set the tone for our masterclass. Women in TICON Africa is a chapter in TICON Africa, which serves women across the continent and the various associations that are affiliated to TICON Africa. But with that, I want to set the tone first in our housekeeping so that we can continue with our session. First of all, may I request that we all keep our mics muted throughout the presentation. If your internet connection is unstable, just use the same link to reconnect. We do encourage your active participation by posting questions in the chat throughout the presentation. We'll actually allow that we address your questions at the end during the question and answer session. And please keep those comments respectful and professional. Today's session is being recorded, and we may get photographs and screenshots taken for documentation and future learning purposes. We encourage that you share your thoughts on social media with on our social media links on the TICON Africa, using the TICON Africa hashtags as well about this event. Finally, we do have a treat. We have the video on TICON Africa Conference alongside AMC, ASCON, and TICON Africa in Zambia, Livingston on the 23rd to 25th September 2026. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. But to get us going into our session, we have the pleasure to introduce today's distinguished facilitator. We have our guest speaker, Ms. Jacqui Muller, an industry coordinator at Belgium Campus, iTversity in South Africa. Jacqui is a technology strategist, automation specialist, educator, and researcher whose work spans artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, data analytics, digital skills development, and future workforce readiness. And she's currently pursuing her PhD focusing on automation governance and strategy, and has received numerous national and international recognitions. And these include this one, Jacqui, you'd have to help me out as you start your presentation. Kulsha's Top Young Geeks. The Kulsha is a tongue twister, but that's an African identity that Jacqui holds to show us her accolades. And she has received an award as an ICT Professional of the Year with the South Africa ICT Association. Her passion lies in preparing the next generation for technology leaders while helping organizations embrace innovation responsibly. We are honored to have her with us today to share insights on one of the most transforming topics of our time, AI. Please join me in giving a warm in virtual welcome to Ms. Jacqui Muller. Jacqui, the platform is now yours.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Lebo. I very much appreciate it. All right, I see our TICON backgrounds aren't working so nicely. All right, team, I'm not sure if we want to maybe bring up the presentation, then I can jump right into it. Perfect, thank you so much. All right, thank you everybody for attending today's session. Today, as Lebo has mentioned, we will be looking at what kinds of emerging trends there are that will be shaping AI in the future. And this is a prediction that we've pulled together from quite a few different sources, pretty much just trying to look out to what 2030 and the rest of the future would look like. Some of the topics that I'll be covering today are pretty much topics that are relevant to the industry as a whole. What I will also be doing is trying to share specifically where we have instances where Africa may or may not be at the forefront of that leadership. And I think it's an important distinguishing factor to make, because we will be able to identify where our responsibility as TICON member countries and professional bodies can essentially assist in making sure that we are prepared for what is coming in the future. Thank you, Dito. You can go over to the next slide. Perfect. So just a little bit of an introduction into myself. Lebo has done an incredible job, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is mostly just to show that there are quite a lot of different collaborations that are run with multiple different institutions. One of the big things that I focus on is trying to kind of decentralize technology and access to technology and training around technology across different skill sets and different industries. So my name is Jacqui Muller. As Lebo has said, I am the industry coordinator with Belgium Campus, but there are quite a few different accolades that I hold within the automation and emerging technology spaces as well. Thank you, Dieter. All right, so if we look at today's agenda, there are a few different things that I'd like to talk about. I am just going to turn my video off so that I can see the slides on the right as well, and then you'll be able to see the text that's there as well. But essentially, quite a few things that I'm looking at establishing or talking about today is firstly the emerging landscape. So what different trends are we picking up? How do we see that converging and pretty much coming together in our African context? Then I want to break this conversation up into three parts. So we will look at intelligent automation and how that is kind of going to take the lead in the next few years. We'll need to look at the infrastructure that we will need to be able to support this journey. And then the third one, which I think is probably what is on everybody's minds and within a lot of the conversations at the moment, is the trust element. So looking at the governance, looking at sustainability, understanding how people are actually going to interact with these technologies. And then the fifth part is going to be the technology leadership. So what do our future technology leaders need to consider and think about to be able to take this journey that we have ahead of us and make it as successful as it has the potential to be? Thanks, Dieter. So when we start to look at the emerging landscape, we can go to the next slide, thank you. We start to look at the four driving forces behind this. And this is now where we start to understand that AI has a very real impact on what we're currently doing. We start to look at how each model and each different technology that is coming into the space is starting to unlock more and more capability, not necessarily only looking at reasoning, but also looking at functionality. We're starting to look at how AI is not only just an interface that we're talking to anymore, but it is actually it actually has capabilities and skills that are being turned into functions and translating into actions that are being performed. Then what we also want to do is understand what the cost is that is associated with this new emerging field of AI. And something we're already seeing quite a lot of is that cost is really starting to hamper some of the conversations. Running AI is quite expensive from an infrastructure perspective. It is also quite expensive from a human capacity perspective. So the bigger the workforce is, the more AI would need to be embedded, the higher those costs would be. And from an organizational perspective, being able to put safeguards and guardrails in place to make sure people are using AI correctly also comes at a cost. There was a client that I worked on a few years ago who was faced with a very real challenge around cybersecurity and governance, where they had to make the decision of whether they would actually pay to fix whatever was wrong in the ecosystem to make it more secure, or continue paying fines and continue on the trajectory that they were already on, where they would pretty much just risk it with the cybersecurity attacks. Because of the cost associated to fixing everything, they did decide to go with the latter. And unfortunately, they did end up having to deal with the consequence thereof. And this is something that became quite a big use case for a lot of different organizations, no matter the size, to learn from. So this is really where we're starting to understand that the cost of AI, the opportunity cost associated to AI, is becoming quite a very big concern and something we need to consider. Then what we're also starting to see is that the world is being used as different instruments, and there are different instruments that are being brought into this landscape that is now starting to bridge this gap between physical and digital divides. So we'll talk about that in probably a few more slides time, but this is really starting to see how we bring together the hardware and the software components and make that interface from a personal perspective going forward a lot more foundational, fundamental. Also, understanding where the regulations and regulatory bodies are coming from, that is something that we're starting to see impact our African policies as well. So in South Africa specifically, GDPR has very much tried to, I don't want to say force, because that sounds quite hectic, but it really has become the basis of what we see as our POPIA Act in South Africa, the protection of personal information. So the way that we actually identify information, the way that we identify people, the way that we store that information, the way that we work with that information, the governance around that is becoming really, really strenuous, and it's becoming very regulated. So we'll see a lot more of this going forward. There are quite a few different organizations within the different African countries that are looking at AI governance specifically, and also at standardizing cybersecurity metrics. This is something where I think Africa is at the forefront and can become a leader in the space in places where we aren't already. Thank you, Dieter. So if we start to look at the different converging waves of change, there are a few core elements or core concepts that we can look at. We've got the communication gap, which is now starting to look at 6G. There is a prediction that by the end of the 2030s, we will most likely already be on 10G. Now, maybe just to give some context into why 6G is something that is being pursued when we already have something like 5G, and in some countries in Africa, we are already struggling just to get normal internet speeds up with very, very rudimentary technology running. But the reality behind the 6G communication is that the idea behind this is that everything on the network would be connected. Every single device on the network would be aware of the other devices and be able to actually communicate and interact with them. So we see in countries like China, this is already becoming quite a big thing, where cars are able to understand when robots are going to change because they're all on the same network. They're already working with these kinds of technologies. I think this is going to be where we see a lot of disparity in Africa. We'll see some cities that will have the capacity to maybe take this on, but not necessarily see the full landscape of all the full potential that this kind of technology has to offer. And I think that's okay, because I think with that, we're already seeing this in some of our other spheres of IT. One of the big challenges we have is cybersecurity. African countries are far more likely to be attacked than some of the other countries in the world. So as soon as we start enabling these kinds of technologies and we aren't necessarily sure how we're going to secure them, it is going to become a very big stumbling block for us. With that being said, our advanced brain-computer interfaces, how humans will actually be able to think with and interact with technology, is also going to see quite a few different evolutions. And I think this is going to change as well. Now, the reason that this is going to become a very important part of what we do is because if we think about it, that interface is really what has amplified the adoption of AI. AI has been with us the way that it is now probably since the 1960s. The only reason people didn't use it as extensively as we do in our everyday lives right now is because it was really difficult to interface with. People didn't really want to interface with something they didn't understand. And now that we have a single platform that is available on any device that we use, and we can actually interface and interact with the AI, it becomes a lot easier to use. So this is going to become a focal point for all the technology moving forward, I believe, because if we can interface with something and we can interact with it and we understand, that we're getting inputs and outputs from it, it's going to make it a lot easier to adopt that technology. That being said, if we look at quantum technologies, that's still a bit of a black hole, but that is going to become far more prominent because we're going to need quantum technologies to keep up with the speed at which cybersecurity and AI are advancing. And then again, related to the 6G communication, the interconnected cities is something that has been forecasted by Gartner to also be on the lookout for within the next few years. Thank you, Dieter. We can move over to the next slide. So if we look at how these trends interlock, we very much understand that intelligence in terms of artificial intelligence is at our doorstep. It's becoming the groundbreaking technology for agents and robots that we're creating, even if these different technologies did already exist at smaller scales prior to the evolution. But the problem is that this intelligence still needs infrastructure, and the infrastructure is becoming quite costly. With the infrastructure that pretty much supports this intelligence, there's also autonomy that is created. We are now seeing that agents are able to work on their own. In some cases, some people actually trust the agents to be more diligent than the human workforce, which I think we can have another discussion around, because I'm not fully convinced that this is going to be one of those situations where AI is going to replace the human workforce. And I'll kind of allude to why I say so in a bit. The problem with autonomy is that it needs trust, and people are at that point where they very easily give trust over. There isn't a lot of focus on governance and security at the moment. There isn't a lot of focus on auditability and understanding how this technology works and what it does. So this is kind of leading to a very quick and very rapid adoption of these kinds of technologies. However, we do need to take a step back and understand what these technologies are doing in our landscape. What access do they have to our information? What is it doing with this information? Because as soon as we freely give our sensitive information and data to these algorithms and it's out there, we can't get it back. We lose control over the narrative and the security of that data. And it does become a very big concern, specifically in larger organizations where the use of AI hasn't necessarily been governed or shut off completely, or there hasn't really been training given around this. The other challenge is that the more this scales, the more sustainability is required, and this is going to be where we start to see things unraveling a little bit. I did say AI is becoming exceptionally expensive to run, especially for larger organizations. So organizations are starting to go back to rather employing human capital because it's ending up to be cheaper and more reliable than some of these autonomous and AI-driven systems. So that, I think, is going to be something we see as a trend in Africa over the next few years, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad one. I do think, however, we are going to be somewhat scrutinized for those decisions because the longer we take to adopt some of these technologies, the further behind we will be deemed to be. And I think that is where we're undermined as Africans quite a lot, because our choices that we make to see and recognize what technology exists and then to choose not to use it is not necessarily always a weakness. And I think this is also going to allow us the opportunity to understand what the weaknesses are in these kinds of implementations so that we don't necessarily need to learn those lessons ourselves. The challenge, which has been a very big focal point for a very long time, is that technology needs people. People use technology. So if there isn't that level of understanding and that level of adoption, technology tends to fail quite easily. And this is why, there's an entire science that has been built around user design or user-centric design and user experience and those kinds of things. Because if a screen or an application or something that needs to be interfaced with by a user, if that needs to be explained, it's not simple enough. And that's generally where this starts to kind of fall apart. People use technology to improve people's lives. And this is kind of something from an automation perspective when we're talking to larger organizations, where we say you can't force a process to change to suit technology. We've got to change the technology to suit the processes and the people in an organization. So I think we're going to go back towards that kind of approach and those fundamentals which have been somewhat lost over the last few years, specifically with process automation having been such a prominent technology that was being adopted throughout different organizations. There are organizations that have also used a lot of data security, data modeling, and data structuring mechanisms where where the focus has been how do we work with data and structure our data so that it works for us. And I think organizations that have taken that step are at a better place now to be able to say, we are able to put intelligence in front of our people. We are able to put processes in front of our people. In situations where the data isn't correct, I think there's still a much bigger challenge because that's a bridge that needs to be closed off regardless of where we are in the technological process. Data is going to remain at the center of everything that we do. Thanks, Tito. You can go over to the next slide. Perfect. So when we look at the agentic AI and intelligent automation part, which is essentially the first part in the three-part series that I want to talk about today, there's a few different subcategories of information that I want to share with you. Now, these subcategories of information essentially refer to different subsections or subtopics that we will see become more relevant in the field of IT. So agentic AI is something we're already looking at. This is now where we're working with Claude, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, normal Copilot, all of these different AI technologies. And it is no longer just giving us information and answers back. It is actually executing tasks for us. The idea behind agentic AI is that, or the agentic automation, which is often used interchangeably, is that a system will become fully autonomous and will be able to think for itself. It'll be able to make its own decisions. And this is going to be quite powerful because traditionally, AI has been very difficult to sell on its own, specifically in process automation. Because if you look at process automation, you can understand what a process currently does, and you can equate that with how many hours you would save if you digitize that process. When you can equate the hours saved and the cost saved, you're able to understand, what your weaknesses and strengths would be of automating that process. With AI, you didn't really have those metrics. Same with data. If you had to clean up your data, there was no way of quantifying what the value is of actually starting that project. Where we bring these two together now, we can actually start to lean on the lessons that we've learned on how we can feasibly and also viably analyze and determine what the benefit would be of automating or even fully automating the system with AI included as well. So this is now where agentic AI, I think, is going to become or continue to stay the focus. I think that it's been the focus for probably the better part of a year now. But this is going to continue to evolve into different parts of or different categories of technology that we don't yet know about. Polyfunctional robots is also the more sophisticated use of general purpose robots to pretty much execute more physical tasks. So where agentic AI would be looking at software tasks, tasks on your computer, those kinds of things, the polyfunctional robots would be looking at tasks that require manual labor. The challenge with this is that there's still a lot of work to be done in, number one, ensuring that your polyfunctional robot has been created for a specific industry, that it has been secured properly, and that the data it's being fed does not overload the technology that is built into those polyfunctional robots. This is something I know that they're also focusing on quite heavily in China at the moment. They had a World Robotics Olympics challenge not so long ago where they had quite a few different fully functional robots run on an athletics track against one another. It didn't go that great. There were some challenges that we learned from there. So again, I don't necessarily think this is something feasible for what we're looking at from an African perspective within the next 5 years. And I think, like I said earlier, I think that's okay. When we couple that up with ambient invisible intelligence, we start to look at how we kind of bring these two together in what we were alluding to earlier with the smart cities. So this is where we have sensors, we have different computational devices, and we're trying to understand, in the network, what is there that we could potentially use to execute an environment or create an environment that is more productive for the people working or living in that same network. All of this is tied together by the human-AI collaboration, and this is what I was referring to earlier. How do we as people interact with this technology in a way that helps us but also, kind of helps the adoption of these kinds of technologies. Thanks, Dieter. We can go to the next slide. So again, just, this is a little bit more information about agentic AI. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but from a leadership perspective, when we think about, where we're moving towards with agentic AI, some of the things that we need to start thinking about is what decisions are we willing to delegate to an agent and how will they be audited? We need to understand, what will these agents do? What information do they need? Can that be given to a single agent? Do we need multiple agents? We do need to start thinking about what that is going to look like, because we're faced with a very real reality of where we'll have a virtual and digital workforce where it will be somewhat augmented. We'll have people and robots working together. And when I say robots, I'm also referring to these agents. Thank you, Dieter. We can move on to the next one. Now, when we look at agentic AI in practice, there's quite a few different places where this can be implemented. Some of the places that are more predominant at the moment and have been in traditional parts of process automation, where we use things like robotic process automation and business process automation. We're specifically software and IT operations, so pretty much taking the already mapped out process, improving it, enhancing it, giving it some technology to execute the existing process and kind of calling it a day. Customer operations, being able to resolve tickets a lot quicker. This is where agents and AI have started to have a much bigger impact. This was something that didn't necessarily fit as a feasible use case for traditional process automation. Same with supply chain and logistics. Although we had models that previously could actually determine what the best route would be, for instance, of actually picking up cargo and dropping cargo off between different warehouses, that is something that we're now using AI to help with the computational power. And this is starting to supplement some of those traditional models that we had, where we're seeing a convergence or a selection of multiple models to create and pretty much just enhance the accuracy in the supply chain and logistics industries. And then in terms of knowledge work, we've seen quite a lot happen in the research perspective. So, and I still can't decide whether this is good or bad, because the problem we still have is that people trust far too easily what AI is doing. AI can put out a load of junk, and we're submitting that as research because we have researchers who aren't necessarily scrutinizing, what references were used or picked up during the creation of the AI document or the research generated by AI. We aren't necessarily validating the results that are coming back from the analytics. So because we've got AI who has the data sets available to it, it can go generate graphs quite easily for us. But without us as researchers actually understanding what the data is underneath and what the trends are, without it being able to evaluate what data was removed, what data was included, how was this skewed, it does start to kind of hamper the research process and the integrity of the research. That being said, this also means that the quality of research can be improved if researchers use this properly. So if we start to use this to, start to gather more information that would be relevant to a specific study or specific research in a specific industry, we would be able to cast a much greater net and be able to kind of improve, like I said, the quality, but also the findings and the scope, the inclusive scope of what our research would cover. So that one is also a double-edged sword for me at the moment, and I think this is something that we're faced with everywhere. I don't think it's a uniquely African problem. I think it's a problem in general. It'll be interesting to see maybe a conversation we can pick up on what are some of the modules we can use or principles we can use to kind of evaluate that specifically going forward. Because I think one of the big things for me that we've seen, when AI started to become adopted quite heavily, specifically when we look at ChatGPT, Claude, those kinds of AI assistants, was that traditionally the AI was kind of trained off of human data, human created data, human verified data. So for all intents and purposes, that data was pretty accurate. Then AI started generating data off of that, and that went into the same knowledge base, and that started to weaken the results and kind of water down some of the knowledge that was created. So there's been a lot of work that has been done to kind of filter some of that out, but it is still a risk for us. So it'll be good for us to understand, what are some of our options to move forward and make sure that that doesn't become our biggest challenge by the time we hit 2030. Okay, thanks, Dieter. We can move over to the next slide. So polyfunctional robots, again, I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but what I do just want to implore people to think about, specifically leaders in the space, is where would one flexible robot replace 3 fixed automations in your operation? Is there a place for polyfunctional robots in your organization? If there is, what does that look like? What is the governance that we need? Is that governance already in place in your organization? Or are we looking for regulatory bodies to start helping us put that in place? Thanks, Dieter. We can move over. Same with the ambient intelligent. These two do link up quite closely. So if we had to look at the leaders in the space, what would you do differently if you could sense everything relevant everywhere all the time? And what would your people and customers accept? So really, when we start to understand ambient intelligence, we understand what different sensors we require to be able to gain and gather additional insights. What would make a difference? What would we use to improve the lives of people? If there is nothing that we would use to improve the lives of people, is it worthwhile investing in this technology? Because it can become quite expensive, and it is very, very dependent on having good connectivity. Even if that connectivity is low powered, we need good connectivity for this to work. Thanks, Dieter. We can go to the next slide. Human AI collaboration, we've spoken about this quite a bit now, but something we need to be very cognizant of is what our roles in the future are going to look like. So from a leadership perspective, are you redesigning roles around augmented professionals, or are you just adding a chatbot? If you're just adding a chatbot, make sure that the investment that you make is subsequent and relevant to what you are achieving with those chatbots. If you are creating full augmented personas or professionals that have job descriptions, what does that look like? Where does that fit into the organogram? It's going to become important to start thinking about these agents as personas with job descriptions, because we will need a way to be able to measure their success, just as we do humans in a team as well. Okay, we can go over to the next slide. Thank you, Dieter. Okay, so when we look at part 2, we start to understand the infrastructure behind what we need. And again, that extended edge computing is something that we're going to push for, quite heavily, I think, throughout the world. I think the need for the advanced connectivity, 6G, 7G, 8G, until we get to 10G is going to become just as important in cities where we are trying to move towards the interconnected city implementations. So I'm not going to dig into that too much. And then the quantum technologies is going to become the next step for our cybersecurity fundamentals and foundations as well. Thank you, Dieter. All right, so when we look at the extended edge computing, this is really where those different sensors and devices on the network are starting to become important in terms of placement, in terms of the connectivity that they have. And when we're in leadership positions and we think about whether this extended edge computing is for us or for our organization, and if it will have a material impact, we need to start thinking about which of our decisions are worth making in under 10 milliseconds, and what would that unlock. In an instance where we have very highly stressed logistics centers where packages need to be transported within 10 milliseconds, or the decision of transporting those packages need to be made within 10 milliseconds, then it becomes important to start considering, what does that extended edge computing look like? If it's going to have no material difference on your business, then the investment that you're going to make into this technology is not going to be relevant, it's not going to be necessary. This is going to become something quite important to remember when we get to the interconnected cities perspective, because this will become a very big foundation for exactly that. Thanks, Dieter. Then we get to the advanced connectivity and 6G. And again, when we start to look at how the different virtual realities or different reality related software and hardware is being developed, we're starting to understand that there's quite a few different implementations of the advanced connectivity interfaces, again talking about that human AI interface, that are going to become very relevant here. Now, Microsoft tried to do this a few years ago, where they had created one of their Microsoft Ignite events with the XR holographic room, where Satya Nadella had given his whole keynote presentation, and anybody that had a virtual reality headset could actually join in that holographic room and sit in the audience in the gallery and actually watch what was happening. And this was during COVID. There was quite a bit of investment made by companies like Microsoft into these kinds of technologies, and it kind of took a bit of a backseat. I know some places are still working on this quite strenuously, but it's become quite a niche market. It hasn't become as freely available or openly available as I think a lot of people had originally intended. But I think it's also something to consider, because if this were to be the way that people were going, or that the whole society were trying to move, and earlier we also had on the slide, we were looking at the societal pull. If society was pulling this kind of adoption, it would become something very important to consider. But from a leadership perspective, when we start to think about advanced connectivity, the 6G, the holographic, all of that separately, we need to start thinking about what our products and services would need to look like if the bandwidth and the latency were never a constraint. If we have any form of a constraint on bandwidth and latency, which is a very real concern for us throughout Africa, even in some of our bigger South African cities, we've got the issue of load shedding as well, which inadvertently impacts our bandwidth and our latency. These are the kinds of challenges that would make this kind of technology, or these implementations of these kinds of technology, really difficult for us to implement. Being able to commercially roll this out, not only through businesses, but through municipalities, through different shopping centers, through different cities, it would become a very big issue if this were to go down. So if your organization were to depend on this quite highly and quite heavily, and suddenly it was no longer available, what would the impact of your business be? What would the opportunity cost be? And I think these are the kinds of things leaders need to consider before they start implementing these kinds of technologies in their ecosystem. Then on the next slide, we have the quantum technologies, and quantum technologies at the moment can be used for a number of different things. And I do think that what's going to end up happening is AI is going to, the simulations we run with AI are going to become very focused on quantum technologies, because the algorithms that we're going to start needing will be at this level. If we think about what happened with blockchain a few years ago as well, if we look at something like Bitcoin, it became more and more difficult to generate or mine a single Bitcoin over time, because the model became so complex. The more chains that were added in, more processing power was required, the longer it took. And that's a really good use case or example as to why quantum computing or quantum technologies is going to become something that we need a lot more of in the future. Now, the reality behind this is, if we take the concept of Bitcoin and we kind of relate that into cybersecurity, with all the technologies we've spoken about today, you can start to see a trend of how these technologies are going to have this very clear and obvious thought about how do we secure these technologies. And that's going to be where our cybersecurity is challenged to go to the next level. And to do that, we're going to need quantum technologies. We're going to need the capacity at this level to be able to move on. Now, from a leadership perspective, what we do need to understand is what are the problems that we have in an organization that are that big that we require quantum technology? Are our secrets vulnerable? Are there things that would be able to live in these kinds of technologies, kind of forever? Or is there any sensitivity around what would be inserted into these kinds of algorithms? Okay, thank you, Dieter. We can go over to part 3. Oh, sorry, interconnected cities first. So yeah, we can go over to part 3. It's fine. Interconnected cities we did speak about briefly. Perfect. So when we look at part 3, we are looking at the trust element. So again, the AI topic has been very, very prominent in today's discussion. But we do need to understand that with AI comes trust. There comes security, there comes responsibility. So kind of just honing in on everything that I've already said. The post-quantum cryptography is essentially what we're going to need to make sure that these systems remain secure. Anything that we put into our own systems that would be kind of interfaced with AI need to be made secure. They need to be governed properly, which is where the AI governance comes in. With AI governance, this is also where I start to advocate for data governance, because the challenge is that a lot of organizations are hoping to skip the data governance step and go directly to AI governance. If you do not have a framework for how your data should be managed, what data should be made available, how it should be used, the basic fundamentals that would go into a data strategy, it is very, very risky to move over directly into an AI governance strategy, because if you move over into AI governance without understanding the constraints of your data or how it's supposed to be upheld with integrity, it becomes exceptionally difficult to kind of govern agents that should be working with that data. It becomes difficult to allow auditability to continue or oversight to continue if you don't have that kind of standard of what should the AI be doing with your data in the first place? Where should that data be coming from? Is it structured enough? It could also lead to hallucinations in your grander ecosystem. We've used quite a few different use cases before as well, where if you implement an AI governance strategy and you build agents off of that strategy without having a data governance strategy in place, you could very easily create financial risks if the AI that has been governed by your policy has access to financial data but no way to ring fence or guard the access that it has. Those kinds of hallucinations, if it's going to be fed straight back into another process, could be detrimental to a business. These are the kinds of things that people don't necessarily think about until it's too late. Our job is to start thinking about these things now, especially as professional bodies, because we're going to most likely have to be the people that is going to translate this into something that organizations can make use of and can tangibly start to quantify and put down into artifacts that can assist their businesses. Sustainable technology, this is going to be at the forefront of everything we do going forward. I don't think this one is much of a surprise. I think we're going to continue on picking up the sustainable technology. I think in Africa specifically, we're going to see a lot of this. And then the human-centered safeguards, making sure that, whatever we build is protected correctly, not only from AI, but from us as well. Unintended consequence is always a very big issue when it comes to adoption of new technologies. If humans haven't been trained on how to use different AIs or different agents or different interfaces, it does pose a risk in the fact that humans could then actually end up using those technologies incorrectly. One of the big use cases that I like to use around this specifically is that we have a challenge, or we've had a challenge before, where Copilot was enabled for an organization where there were probably about 100 to 250 people that worked within the organization, and everybody got given Copilot licenses. There was a lady who went in. She was an assistant to one of the deputy or department heads, and she'd actually gone and built a Copilot agent which would look at all the contracts within the HR department and pretty much just allow people to ask questions off of those contracts. The problem was that there was no role-based security on those contracts. So somebody, let's say a developer from the one department, could actually go query what was in the contract of the CEO, for example. And just like that, the CEO's salary was made public knowledge because, it wasn't properly, the information wasn't properly managed in terms of access. So had there been a policy around all of this stuff, had the safeguards been put in place before everybody was given access, had the training been given, these are the kinds of things that could have been avoided. So just as much as we need to be worried about technology, we also need to make sure that we train people correctly so that we don't have to be worried about people. Thank you, Dieter. We can go over to the next slide. So in terms of post-quantum cryptography, again, just from a leadership perspective, something we do need to start thinking about is how long must the data stay secret, and will today's encryption still be standing then? So I think this is a very important question specifically for different organizations in different industries, because the regulations will sometimes depict how long data should be kept for. Not necessarily whether it should stay secret. That would be something that would stay in your governance policy and your data policy. But being able to manage retain your data that should be retained as well should also be something to be considered, because a lot of that information could still be physical. So how do we consider all of the data in our landscape when we start to look at these kinds of technologies? Okay, we can go over to the next slide. Okay, then we've got the AI governance. In terms of the leadership consideration, who in your organization can say no to an AI deployment? And what evidence on what who in your organization can say no to an AI deployment and on what evidence. So one of the things that should be considered within the governance policy that you have specifically for AI in an organization would be around who can deploy certain AI agents or AI models or anything around that kind of capability, if I can put it that way. This does come with a few checks and balances as well. So making sure that the data sources of these models are properly vetted. This generally does go through an AI board. So generally what some organizations would do is they would appoint an AI board the same way that they would appoint a cybersecurity officer to ensure that whatever the AI has access to is relevant, it's being safeguarded correctly, and then the business criticality of this will be measured. So is it something that the entire business can use? Is it only for a subset of users? What technology is used? All that kind of stuff. So definitely something to consider from an AI governance perspective. Dieter, we can go to the next slide. Sustainable technology is also a big thing, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is also just around how we can make use of AI to ensure that, just give me a second, let me just get the alarm off. Sorry about that. There was an alarm going off in the background. So again, from a sustainable technology perspective, we need to make sure that the ambition we have to use AI is very much compatible with our different commitments that we have from a sustainable technology perspective. We also need to understand how we can measure that. Thank you, Dieter. We can go on to the next one. And then the brain-computer interfaces, again, one of the big things that we need to think about here when we kind of transition from the human-computer interfaces to brain-computer interfaces is how we start to bring in that cognitive ability. So what we should be considering here is what safeguards we need to put in place before we can look at cognitive data and how that's going to have an impact in our workplace. This is probably something that would be really good to pick up in probably another session. Because this kind of grows legs very quickly when we start to think about what brain-computer interfaces could specifically be referring to. Because just as we're talking about cognitive data, the kind of perspective here is leaning a lot more towards what is being done with Neuralink. So there are different initiatives where clinical implants are being put into people's brains to see, you know, how they can restore speech, how they can restore movement. There's another kind of technology subcategory, if I can name it that, which also refers to robotic computer interfaces, where we're starting to look at the adaptation of, you know, prosthetics, being able to help paralyzed people use their hands and their feet again, based on, you know, literally just having signals sent from the brain directly to the prosthetic. So this is becoming something more on the dark science side of things, if I can put it that way. Definitely something we can look into and kind of dig into a little bit more. But I think from a technology perspective, the kind of matter or the term that is more relevant to this conversation is that cognitive data piece. How do we kind of incorporate that into different future workplaces? Thank you, Dieter. We can move on to the next one. Okay, then when we look at the future of technology leadership, we need to understand that technology leadership is changing. So when we start looking at how we used to run technology, we start to look at, you know, what different systems we used, what technologies we had, how that was managed as a cost center. We looked at different planning cycles, we had roadmaps. We used to hire for very specific roles. And where we're going now, where we're kind of headed towards, is we're moving more towards orchestrating intelligence. So we're less reliant on technology in the sense that we're not kind of micromanaging the technology as much anymore, but we are starting to see how we can use the technology we've kind of matured up until now to incorporate intelligence with that and start to look at how we create a blended workforce of people and agents and how we govern that. The kind of use case around this and the focus is really going to be how we use technology as a business model, how we govern this, how we trust this, how we are responsible and accountable for what the AIs do. Because just as a team lead in any organization, if one of your devs mess up, you're essentially accountable. Same would need to happen here. If an AI messes up, you need to be accountable if you are still the team lead of that augmented workplace or that team. So being able to put this together, being able to focus on that earning of trust as a product feature, it's going to become really, really important, because we're no longer just working with disciplinary teams that are just compiled of humans. We are now going to work with interdisciplinary teams that also consist of agents. So being able to adapt and grow towards that, I think, is going to be interesting. If I look at some of the more softer skill related elements around this, we also need to understand what the future is going to look like of emotional intelligence for working with agents. Do we need to start building agents that can be emotionally intelligent towards people? I think there's a whole precedent that is now starting to be created in quite a few different parts of the legal system to see how, these kind of interoperable dynamics, if I can put it that way, between agents and people in these dynamic workplaces are going to happen, or how it's going to unfold. I think those are kinds of answers that we won't necessarily have yet, but it'll be interesting to think about, because when you start creating a team that has that kind of composition, it'd be something to think about. Okay, we can go on to the next one, Dieter.
Before you go to the next one, Jackie, may I interrupt
Yes,
you?
go for it.
It's very interesting that you talk of technology leadership, and we know that most of our AI projects in Africa do really struggle, whether it's AI governance or emerging technology governance. Our leaders also struggle with the skill set to actually understand what they are trying to lead. What would you recommend to inform and also empower our leadership in making sure that they are savvy to the technology itself and its dynamics? Because the biggest challenge now is the decision makers being able to trickle down those decisions to the ones that are actually implementing in a way that both can communicate, bottom up, top down. I mean, it's a huge challenge. Where can we strike a balance there? There's quite a huge thing between policy, the leadership, AI governance. That mix, there's an imbalance. What would you recommend to help our C level and directors, board directors, to make sure that they better position themselves to support and make decisions around these technologies?
Thank you for that question, Deborah. It's a very insightful, thought-provoking one, and I think it's also a very important one, because everything comes back down to the policies that govern the technology. And I guess this is where things become really difficult, because there's a lot of organizations who haven't put together that strategy on data. They haven't put strategies down on applications they use or technologies they use. They haven't put the policies down on, what needs to be done from an AI perspective. And my challenge for C-suite level employees or leaders who would be thinking about, what we can do better to actually make sure that we have a successful adoption of these kinds of technologies, is to start putting that in place. Because if you put down a strategy, and part of that strategy is your measures of how do we ensure our data is clean, how do we ensure our data is accurate, how do we ensure that data can only be accessed by XYZ way based on what is in our policy. As soon as we start putting those measures down, we can have that conversation from bottom up. We can have these different metrics that can change. A strategy or a policy doesn't necessarily have to stay the same for eternity. It can definitely go through an evolution, every few years. But I think it becomes critical to start putting down those measures and the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Even if organizations just start there, what do we include from a technology perspective? What do we exclude? If we exclude these technologies, do we have a strategy to ensure that those technologies cannot be used as integrations into any of our processes? If we start there, that's a very basic point to start. We move over to data, we do the same thing there. Then everybody top down is on the same page. Middle management can be measured on different metrics to lower management, to upper management. This can be a really good starting point to have those conversations. I'm a very big advocate for going back to the policies, because as soon as there's an instance where something has slipped through, an agent has hallucinated, it's gone through to a client, anything like that, the first thing that an organization should do is go back to the policy and update it or fix it and ensure that that doesn't happen again. And the measure should be in place to make sure that if it did happen, how does it not happen again? I don't know if that answers your question, but that would be what I advocate for.
Basically, you're saying the lack thereof of AI governance, your policies, this is the downfall. And if we don't have any clarity as to how we are going to implement, then we would have a problem in our processes or implementing anything, either automation or AI agents within our systems. But I'm curious once again, Jackie. But I want to give our audience the opportunity to ask questions. Do you mind if I just ask our audience to ask? I know that we're
Go
running
for
out
it.
of time. To my lovely audience, this is your opportunity. Please raise your virtual. Sorry, my audio just went out. Or put your question on the chat and we can take it from there. Do we have any questions on chat? Anyone wishing to ask a question? Would be happy to take your virtual hand. Lethabong Mkhabo, I think, from Lesotho. What role will AI play in creating inclusive workplaces and opportunities for women in tech? This industry quite is male dominated. That's a good one, Lethabong.
It is. That is
There's
a
one
very
for
good
you,
question.
Jackie. Yes.
Thank you, Lebo. Thank you, Latabo. That is a very good question. So I think what role AI will play is that it will bring multiple disciplines together. And I think this is something that is quite interesting for me because we tend to say IT itself is male dominated. And I think that is no longer as true as it used to be. If I look at things like user experience or user design, which is also a subsection or subfield of IT, we do have quite a lot of women working there. We have a lot of process automation developers who are female. We have a lot of developers in different areas of IT that, or not necessarily just in IT, but in disciplines that kind of integrate with IT are very prominent. Finance is also a really good example. So I think what AI is going to do for us is it's going to start grouping together these different disciplines where women are able to see that the entry into the market is not as heavily governed or as heavily kind of barricaded as I think a lot of women think it is. The ability to now use AI to actually start off and write some code is quite easy. So I'm really hoping that we'll have a lot more women use their subject matter expertise in different disciplines to actually create systems, solutions, and businesses for themselves that would kind of integrate these different worlds together.
Cool. Thank you so much. Any other questions? I do not see any other questions on our PowerPoint, Jackie. You can continue with the slide. I do have another question though after the slide.
That's perfect. Thank you, Lebo. Okay, so maybe just to jump into the slide, I think we only have a few more left. If we look at the 5 imperatives of technology leaders, there's a few things that I implore all technology leaders to look at. So above and beyond actually putting together the strategy and the policy for AI and data, also build an agentic operating model. So look at what your work model or your workplace model should look like if you have a blended team of human and AI agents kind of living in the same team. Invest in that trust by design. Make sure that you've got that AI governance, the policies, the security, and all that stuff together. Grow skills faster than knowledge. So something that AI is doing is it's making us increasingly lazy. And I think this needs to be challenged by leaders. We need to figure out better ways to be able to look at the knowledge gaps that are being created and rather grow the skills that we need to be able to execute tasks than to rely on AI to do it for us. Then we need to modernize the foundation, again, looking at the different technologies and infrastructure we need to actually make this work. And then technology leaders are challenged to lead responsibly. It is going to be incredibly difficult to kind of take the lead and, work by example. If you don't want a lazy workforce, you as a leader yourself should not be lazy. You should be making sure that you validate what is coming back from the AI, making sure that you can measure what is coming back from the AI. Don't just let an agent run off and do whatever it needs to without any auditability. To lead the change for an organization, we'll need the leaders to start kind of guiding that change as they go. Okay, and Dieter, we can go to the next slide. Lebo, you wanted to ask a question. I don't know if we wanted to pause there for the question.
Yes. Mine is actually more on AI and also on the human side of things.
Mm-hmm.
AI is good for us in so many ways, and we're speaking of human centered safeguards, we're speaking of leadership, technology leadership, and just, DT, could you go back to the slide? And these five imperatives here, they actually help us see the actual package to succeeding in implementing anything around AI and emerging technologies. But I want to just fall back on the human component that is taken away by the technology itself and how it can be inculcated or implemented into such systems. Humans, we have to, I'll give an example. We teach our kids, technology teaches them. Nowadays, technology is taking over everything, and we're losing the human component of that interpersonal, emotional interaction between one person to the next. How can this technology be implemented such that it does not take away that component that we so much need for humans to actually develop? And I know you mentioned cognitive development. You actually mentioned it from a cognitive data perspective, and instead of the human cognitive growth and development. How can we balance this? I'm a bit at a loss because I also teach around computer science education, and there's quite a bit of a loss in the human side of things and also the technology side of things. I don't know if you understand me, Jackie.
I think so. So I think more, we have this kind of very real threat in our face at the moment, right? Where AI is not only making people lazy, but it's also taking away opportunities for them to continue growing, the knowledge and the skills. That being said, it's also the way that we choose to use technology. So just as, we have people who are relying on technology to kind of give them answers without them necessarily having to think, it also opens up a world that people have a lot more access to information now than we did before. Sure, we had the internet, we had Google search, we had all those kinds of things. And I think my biggest concern, specifically if we just look at AI, it very much is a worry that people are going to continue being lazy. We are going to end up with a much lazier workforce. We aren't necessarily going to go out and look for opportunities. And I think what scares me about this is if we look at the previous industrial revolutions, there's always been something where, in that revolution, people were afraid because it's new technology that's coming in. It's going to take away jobs from people. But what ended up happening was people were resilient and they found, new skills to develop, new ways to make money, new ways to stay relevant. And I think what worries me is that if we don't start finding those opportunities now, or if we don't necessarily encourage people to find those opportunities now, it is going to lead to a much greater divide. The way that I kind of talk to students about this is that if I look at a computer science perspective at the moment, Belgium Campus iTversity is specifically geared towards IT related degrees. So we do have students that are very much worried about, why they're paying quite a substantial amount of money to study IT if there's AI agents that can essentially write code better than they can. And the reality of it is that the skills we develop through our everyday life help us kind of grow in a way that AI cannot necessarily replace. So if we choose to take our skills that we learn from these kinds of degrees, we can still build businesses. And we can use AI to supplement the workforce that we would need to do the repetitive manual stuff the same way that we would do with process automation. The problem for me is that AI still comes at a very expensive cost. So small businesses are going to be challenged with doing this alone in some aspects because the implementation of AI is going to cost them more than what they're going to make when they start their business. And from that perspective, I still see there being hope. I still see us not necessarily, kind of indulging in the lazy kind of component of it, if I can put it that way. But if we can kind of start to look at how we can entice entrepreneurship more, I think it's a good start. My problem is I am just as worried as you are at the moment, Lebo, when we look at how this kind of technology would supplement, human skills. Because again, there's a lot of reasons why this technology could work in Africa, but also why we aren't going to realize the full potential because there are very key and critical issues that we need to address first. I think our kind of work that we can put together as a collective in these different professional bodies is to see how we can overcome some of these challenges, kind of grow the skills and the knowledge base around this so that we can start to kind of get the same benefit out of it. But I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't worried to some degree that this is going to create a much lazier workforce.
So basically, we agree that there is a niche that we need to tap into to try and balance this, and hopefully, we'll find something that could help the upcoming generation to strike a balance.
Exactly. I do
Jackie,
know that we are over time. I don't know if we want to wrap up with more questions from the audience.
yeah, I was just about to say I need to take one more question and then we close the session. Do we have any questions from our audience? So far, I've only had one, but I know that Isabel Chisomo Capezi mentioned that there is a big problem. The biggest challenge is how to use AI responsibly, and you did mention it earlier in your presentation: the trust and accountability, and the ethical side of it. It falls under the AI governance as well, and in from whoever is implementing, and also the policies in place that would guide um, any implementation in our organizations. I believe this would be the end of it, Jackie. Jackie, if you have, I can give you a minute if you want to close to summarize the last slide. But if not, then I can just go straight into closing the session.
Thank you so much, Lebo. I'm happy for you to close the session.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Um, Thank you, everyone. It's AI is that topic that we never stop talking about because it really touches all aspects of our lives. And Jackie, you've really given us an eye opener to so many other things that we can tap into with AI. Not just AI, but also emerging technologies. Sometimes we forget to realize that AI is a component in technology, but there are other technologies that are also involved, and we're very thankful to that. We could You could touch on also quantum technologies and other technologies as well. And thank you to our audience for your questions and your participation. We would be happy to see you again in the future on our master classes. But Jackie, to you, on behalf of the Women in TICON Africa Executive Committee, our partners, and everyone who joined us today from around the world, thank you sincerely for sharing your experiences and your practical insights. Your presentation actually has not only expanded our understanding of emerging trends in artificial intelligence, but also inspires us to become courageous, ethically savvy, and innovative technology leaders. I look forward to more chats with you, and hopefully we'll meet at the TICON Africa Conference in Zambia on the 23rd to the 25th of September 2026. To all those that are attending, before we conclude, we have a final announcement, a reminder that we have a 5 minute video to watch. It's on TICON Africa ANC ASCON 2026 conference. This conference is in Zambia, Livingston, and this is where we can engage, share ideas. You will meet Jacqui there, and you'll meet many more others from across the continent and also the world over. We do have many to meet at this conference that are affiliates with TICON Africa as well. Finally, thank you once again for joining us from across Africa and around the world. Have a wonderful day, stay safe, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next Women in TICON Africa Masterclass. Thank you, everyone. 5 minutes. Thank you. See you soon.
We really need to work closely together. We need to collaborate and congregate together. So events like this are really critical. So we definitely should have more of this. And in 2026, let's get everyone here.
Africa's not one country, it's 54 different countries, and everyone has their own challenges and solutions. By bringing everyone together to network and share insights, we can assist in helping African professionals find solutions to their own unique problems.
Africa's brightest minds in marketing, ICT, and supply chain are gathering in Zambia to connect, collaborate, and lead Africa's next chapter. Make sure you secure your place among them.